At my own dinner table. Food I cooked myself still warm on the plates. My son looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've been freeloading long enough. Know your place, old man. Give up that bedroom or pack your junk and get out." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I set my fork down, folded my napkin, and said 2 words. All right. He thought he had won. 3 months later, he lost everything he thought was his. And I was watching the sunset from somewhere he never knew existed. I built that table myself. That's the first thing that came to my mind on the evening of August 1st, a Friday, when I stood in the kitchen of my house on Troost Avenue in East Kansas City and looked through the open doorway into the dining room. 1990. Brody was 4 years old, running circles around my legs while I sanded the edges smooth. My wife, Norma, had been standing in the doorway with a dish towel in her hands, laughing at the both of us. I had used walnut wood because she liked walnut. Said it felt like something that was meant to last. Welcome to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here. If these stories stay with you the way they stay with me, I'd be grateful if you'd like this one and consider subscribing. It helps more people find stories worth hearing. Before we go any further, I want to ask, is this your first time sitting down with one of these stories? Or have you been here a while? Let me know in the comments. One more thing, before we begin, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What's real is the truth underneath it. That part I can stand behind. 34 years later, I was laying out places at that same table for 3. My name is Eugene Callard, 68 years old, retired plumber, widower. 31 years in this house, 1 son grown inside these walls, a wife in the ground these past 5 years, and every bill paid on time through all of it by these 2 hands alone. Not a grand life by certain measures, but every corner of it was mine. That Friday afternoon, I'd given most of my hours to the kitchen beef stew with onions and potatoes, the recipe Norma reached for on cold evenings, though real cold in Kansas City in August is more idea than fact. I'd put together biscuits from scratch because Brody had said once a long while back that he missed them. I'd pressed the cloth napkins, the ones with the small green border, because Lacey was joining us and I wanted the night to feel like it meant something. Lacey Dunmore had been part of Brody's life for 11 months. 30 years old, grew up in Leawood, and she had a habit of surveying a room the way a home inspector walks through before writing his report, methodical, detached, looking for what was wrong. Every visit those eyes swept the walls, the furniture, the tile work, and found nothing worth lingering on. Brody had mentioned that her father, Harlan Dunmore, ran a string of upscale restaurants across the Midwest. It hadn't taken me long to work out that in Lacey's estimation, a retired plumber's house in East Kansas City was more liability than heritage. I made the stew anyway. They pulled up at 7:15. The car door came first. Then Brody's voice tight and clipped the way it got when he was putting on a show for somebody. My son, 34 years old, working entry-level real estate though. To hear him tell it, he might as well have been brokering towers along Country Club Plaza every day of the week. He walked in without knocking, same as he'd done all through his teens, with Lacey a step behind him, in a white blouse that likely cost more than a month of my utilities. "Something smells good," Brody said, eyes already dropped to his phone. "Beef stew," I told him. "Another 10 minutes or so." Lacey drifted through the living room unhurried, and I watched her stop at the bookshelf, tip her head at the photos lined up there, then move on toward the kitchen without a sound. No offer to lend a hand. She chose a chair and settled into it, her purse arranged on the seat next to her, with the care of someone holding a spot for a better guest. The meal got underway without much noise. I carried everything to the table, filled the glasses, took my place across from my son. Renee, Brody's younger sister, had come around earlier in the week, and I'd floated the idea of her joining us. But a text came in at 6, she'd picked up a hospital shift. So, the 3 of us it was. Brody worked through his food without raising his eyes much. Lacey ate in small, measured bites and put no questions to either of us about what was on the table. I made 2 attempts at conversation, the first about the block we lived on, the second about a volunteer project I'd taken on, patching up homes for older folks over in Westport. Brody gave me single words back. Lacey offered a smile that stopped well short of her eyes. I'd gotten up for seconds, gone to fetch the biscuits off the counter, when Brody put his fork down harder than the moment called for. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the sleeping arrangement." I brought the biscuits over and took my seat again. "What about it? Lacey needs a proper room." Stated it like weather. The guest room doesn't cut it, no space wrong bathroom, no closet to speak of. She needs the master. I looked at my son, then over at Lacey, who sat with her attention fixed on her plate, wearing an expression of composed patience as though her lines were already memorized and she was simply waiting for her entrance. "That's my room," I said. "Dad, come on." Brody's voice had a thin skin of irritation stretched over something considerably harder. "The whole house is yours to move around in. You don't need that room to yourself." "I've slept there for 30 years, I said. "Norma and I chose it ourselves when we first moved in." Something moved across Brody's face then. That thin skin gave way. "You've been freeloading under my roof long enough," he said, the reasonable tone gone entirely. "Know your place, old man. Move your stuff down to the storage room and stay out of the way, or pack your junk and get out. I am not letting you embarrass me in front of her family. You understand me?" The room went still in a way I felt in my body. Standing inside that quiet, I became conscious of several things simultaneously. The refrigerator running in the kitchen, the low hum of traffic drifting in from Troost Avenue, and the fact that Lacey's face hadn't moved at all, hadn't flickered with surprise or discomfort, which told me clearly she'd been briefed on exactly where this evening was headed. And Renee's chair sat empty at the far end of this table, because my daughter had decided a shift at the hospital was the better place to be tonight. I couldn't hold that against her. My chest didn't collapse the way I'd half expected it might. I had brought this boy up, fed him, kept him clothed, held vigil through his fevers, and his failures sat beside him through the heartbreaks that feel terminal when you're in the middle of them. Years of double shifts, so he could attend a school I had no business affording. And here he was at a table I had built plank by plank, ordering me out of my own home. What rose up in me then was neither grief nor anger. It was something colder than both, a clarity that arrived the way early morning air does before the day has softened anything, when you can see exactly what's in front of you, with no haze between you and it. I set my fork down, lifted the napkin, folded it once, folded it again, and laid it next to my plate. I moved my chair back from the table. "All right, Brody," I said. My own voice surprised me with how level it came out, if that's how it is. I rose and headed for the hallway where my hand met the wooden banister at the foot of the stairs, the same one I'd swapped out twice across the years because wood doesn't hold up forever under the weight of a family's daily life. I never turned back toward the table. Not another word from me. But climbing those stairs, something was already stirring in the back of my mind, unhurried, purposeful, the way water works toward level ground, without any help from you. I only had to give it room to move. The storage room greeted me with the smell of motor oil and aged cardboard. I hadn't stepped foot in there in nearly 2 years, not since I'd carried the last of Norma's gardening things to the back shelf and promised myself I'd sort through them when the time was right. The time had never been right. And now, here I stood, with a pillow wedged under one arm and a blanket folded under the other, taking stock of the narrow cot I'd put together ages ago for the odd night when someone needed a place to land. My house. My storage room floor. I put the pillow down, lowered myself onto the cot, and felt the frame give a metallic groan beneath me, a thin, tired sound that spoke plainly to what I didn't have the energy to put into words. One bare bulb above me throwing yellow across the concrete. Beyond the wall, I could make out Brody and Lacey moving through the rooms upstairs, their voices quiet and unhurried, the easy sounds of people making themselves at home, somewhere that wasn't theirs to claim. I didn't cry. That matters, so I'll say it plainly. After Norma died, there were months when tears came on, without invitation, in the middle of a grocery aisle, in a parking lot, once behind the wheel of my truck, in front of a hardware store, on an ordinary Tuesday. That season of grief shows you the difference between sorrow that rips you wide open and the kind that compresses instead, packing itself into something dense and permanent inside your chest, a weight you learn to carry rather than one that carries you under. What settled over me on that cot was the second. I was reaching for my reading glasses in my shirt pocket when I noticed it. Brody's phone resting face up on the small wooden shelf near the door. He must have set it there earlier while he was digging around in the room and walked out without remembering it. The screen had gone dark. The right thing was to leave it alone. Get some sleep, hand it to him in the morning, say nothing. I am 68 years old. I've shown better judgment than this on many occasions. But I reached for it. When my fingers touched the screen, it came alive, and it wasn't locked. Brody had never bothered with passwords at home, said it was more trouble than it was worth. The first thing I saw was a text thread sitting open, a group chat with a label I didn't know, some kind of nickname. 4 people in the thread. Brody's name was at the top. I read through it slowly. I have never been a fast reader, and I don't skim when something has weight to it. The messages were from earlier that week. Brody writing to what looked like two cousins on his mother's side, and a friend I half remembered from his college days. It had started with Brody describing the house, describing me using words I won't put down here because they don't deserve the space. What stopped me cold, what made my hand lock up around that phone, was a single message near the bottom. Something Brody had typed. Just let the old man think he still matters. Won't be long now. Once V moves in, we handle the rest. I went through it 3 times. Not because the meaning escaped me the first time around. It hadn't. I read it 3 times because I needed to be certain I wasn't layering something onto those words that wasn't there. Wasn't making the error a father makes when he half expects betrayal and then reads it into everything. But there was no other reading. It was exactly what it looked like. I turned the phone over and set it back on the shelf. Sat there with my palms on my knees and let my eyes rest on the concrete floor. The bulb above me hummed. Outside, a car rolled slowly past on Troost Avenue, its headlights sweeping for a moment across the small window high on the wall. Just let the old man think he still matters. I had never counted myself among the naive. 30 years in a trade that demands you look at a problem squarely and solve it without sentiment. You don't get sentimental about a fitting that's been leaking in the wall for 6 months. But somewhere in the space between being a father and being a fool, I had convinced myself that whatever Brody's failings were, and I had never been blind to them, something solid still ran underneath. That beneath the impatience and the entitlement, beneath the years of taking more than he ever gave back, there was still the kid who used to go limp against my shoulder on long car rides. That message told me the floor had rotted through a long time ago. I just hadn't gone to check. I picked up my own phone from beside me on the cot and dialed Hector Ibanez. Hector and I had been friends for 39 years, going back to when we were both young men on construction crews through the Blue Springs area, him pulling wire me, running pipe. 2 guys from working families who were trying to build something that would hold. He was the one who sat next to me at St. Luke's Hospital the night Norma died. He was the one who appeared at my door the Saturday after with a cooler of beer and a folding chair, and didn't say a word for 2 hours, which was precisely what I needed. If there was anybody I could call at 11:30 on a Friday night, it was Hector Ibanez. He picked up on the second ring. "Eugene, everything okay?" "No," I said. "Not really." I heard the shift of his weight, the sound of a television going quiet. "Talk to me." I walked him through dinner. I told him about the phone. I read him the message every word. When I finished the line, went quiet in a way that wasn't empty. It had density to it, the kind of quiet a person holds when they're taking something seriously. That boy Hector said it last, and didn't finish the sentence. "Yeah," I said. "Eugene, there's something I've been meaning to bring up." His voice took on a more careful, deliberate quality. "You remember that mountain property I mentioned back in the spring? The condo up in the Ozark Highlands, the one my neighbor's brother-in-law was trying to sell?" I did remember. He'd brought it up over coffee in April, and I had half listened the way you do. When something seems like it belongs to a life you aren't quite living. "I remember," I said. "It's still on the market," Hector said. "And Eugene, I think you ought to go see it tomorrow." I looked at the concrete floor. I looked at the yellow bulb. I looked at the shelf where Brody's phone lay, face down in the dark. "Yeah," I said. "I think you're right. I came awake at 4:53 in the morning and didn't waste any effort trying to sleep again. The cot had done what cots do, reminded me every hour or so that it was a cot, not a bed, and that the man lying on it had made decisions that put him there. My lower back ached. The bulb had given out sometime around 2, and I'd spent the remaining hours in full dark, listening to the house around me, all its familiar clicks and murmurs, the sounds that 31 years of living produce in wood and plaster when the night cools them down. I got up the way men my age do when they'd rather not negotiate with their own joints first thing. Folded the blanket, stacked the pillow on top. Then I moved through the hallway in my socks past the stairs, past the row of framed photos I hadn't truly looked at in years, the way you stop seeing what's always been there, and went to the kitchen. I made coffee, just for myself. Standing at the counter while it brewed, I looked out the window at the backyard. Still dark out, that particular darkness that settles over the city in the last few minutes, before it begins waking itself up again, when Kansas City holds still for a moment between one day and the next. Norma had put a lemon tree in back there in 2002. It was still going strong, still producing more fruit than one man could put a dent in. And every summer since she passed, I'd been leaving bags of lemons on the neighbors' porches. I poured a cup and sat down at the kitchen table. I opened the banking app on my phone and pulled up the supplemental card. That was the bank's term for it's supplemental. 8 years ago, when Brody was between jobs and needed something to carry him through, I'd attached the card to my checking account. A temporary measure, that was the phrase I'd used to myself at the time. The card had been running for 8 years. All that time I had read the monthly statements with the particular mix of guilt and resignation that a father arrives at when he knows he's enabling something and keeps doing it anyway. $310,000. That was the number in my savings account when I switched screens. Money I had grown carefully over 20 years of freelance consulting after leaving the plumbing company cost estimates and financial projections for small contractors all over the county. I had never mentioned that account to Brody, not because I was keeping secrets, but because the subject had never come up, and because some quiet part of me understood that if he knew about it, there would be a conversation I didn't want to have. I went back to the account management screen, found the supplemental card, pressed cancel. The app asked me to confirm. I confirmed. A message came up on the screen. Supplemental card ending in 3862 has been deactivated. The card holder will be notified. I set the phone down on the table face down and finished my coffee. Brody came downstairs at 8:45. I heard him before he appeared, that heavy assured tread of someone who had slept soundly in a comfortable bed, the particular footfall of a man who woke up that morning believing things were unfolding exactly as he'd planned. He came into the kitchen in a gray t-shirt and basketball shorts, hair pressed flat on one side from the pillow, and looked at me sitting at the table, the way you glance at a chair that's been left in the middle of the room. "Is there any coffee left?" he asked. "In the pot," I said. He poured himself a cup, leaned back against the counter, and started scrolling through his phone. After a moment, without raising his eyes, he said, "Lacey wants breakfast. There's nothing in the fridge. Can you run to the store?" I looked at him. "No," I said. He looked up. "What?" "No," I said. "I'm heading out this morning." Brody's expression moved from mild irritation into something with a harder edge. "Dad, it's a 15-minute drive. She just wants eggs and some fruit, maybe some pastries from that place on Main Street." "Then she can go get them," I said. "Or you can." He stood there staring at me with his mouth open slightly, wearing the look of a man who had walked into a room expecting no resistance and found a wall instead. Then he pushed off the counter, snatched his keys from the hook by the door and said, "Fine, I'll go myself." I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it in the drying rack. I went to the storage room, changed into clean clothes, and had myself together by the time Hector's truck rolled up out front at 8:55. I was nearly at the front door when I heard it. Brody's voice from the driveway loud enough to reach me through the walls. "What do you mean it's declined?" A pause. Run it again. Another pause longer than the first. And when he spoke again, the confidence had drained out entirely, replaced by something thin and rattled. "That's not possible." "Run it one more time." I opened the front door. Brody was standing next to his car in the driveway with his phone pressed to his ear, his face carrying the look of a man who has just discovered the ground under his feet is not nearly as firm as he'd assumed. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Have a good morning, Brody," I said. I walked past him to Hector's truck, pulled open the passenger door, and got in. "Ready?" Hector asked. "More than ready," I said. Hector pulled away from the curb, and I kept my eyes forward, not back at my son, standing in the driveway with a dead card and an empty cup, working through the first slow realization that something had shifted. Hector Ibanez drove the way he always had. One hand easy on the wheel, the radio settled on a classic rock station that required no thought from either of us. We had been making drives like this together since 1985, the two of us in one truck or another, moving through the geography of Kansas City, the way working men do, not as tourists but as men who know which streets pool up in January and which shortcuts close themselves off after 7 in the morning. Hector was 66 years old, 2 years my junior, with the wide shoulders of someone who had spent 4 decades pulling wire through walls and the quiet ease of a man who had never once tried to be anything other than what he was. He didn't ask how I was feeling. Hector never asked how you were feeling. He asked what you were going to do, which was a different question, and the more useful one. "The agent's name is Eckhart," he said, merging onto the 10 West. "Met him through my neighbor's brother-in-law last spring. Straight shooter, doesn't oversell. The place has been sitting because the owner wanted cash, and most buyers can't come with cash. How much, I asked. $265. Hector said, two-bedroom, third floor, end unit. The view is the whole thing, Eugene. I don't want to put it into words, I want you to see it yourself. I nodded and turned my eyes to the window. The freeway was already thickening even at this hour that particular Saturday morning, traffic of a city that doesn't fully stop. I watched the neighborhoods shift as we moved west, out of the denser commercial stretches of East Kansas City, through Overland Park and then north into the hills, where the houses thinned and the trees started to mean more than the signs. The Ozark Highlands. I had driven through them many times over the years, heading out to jobs at Lake of the Ozarks and Parkville, but I had never once thought of them as somewhere a man like me might actually live. They had always seemed to belong to a different kind of person, someone whose life ran in a different channel than mine had. Eckhart was waiting in the small parking area when Hector pulled in. A trim man in his 50s, firm handshake, unhurried in the way of someone who understood that certain decisions can't be pushed and didn't try to push them. "Mr. Callard," he said, "good to meet you. Hector's told me a little about your situation." "Just looking this morning," I said, which wasn't entirely accurate but felt like the right footing until I knew more. The building was 3 stories Spanish-style stucco with a terracotta roof set back from a narrow road that curved up through the trees and dry brush. It was quiet in the way that only comes from genuine distance, not insulation, but actual separation from the noise below. I could hear birds. I hadn't heard birds in my backyard in years without traffic running underneath them. Eckhart led us up to the 3rd floor and led us into the end unit. The door opened onto a living space with high ceilings and wide windows. And through those windows, the first thing I saw was Kansas City. All of it, or what felt like all of it. The basin spreading out in the morning haze, the downtown skyline faint and low in the distance, the grid of streets running every direction across the flat ground below. Millions of people and millions of lives compressed from this height into something that almost resembled stillness. I had lived in that city for 68 years and never seen it from this angle. "The master bedroom has the same view," Eckhart said from somewhere behind me. "Second bedroom faces north, more trees than city. Kitchen was updated 3 years ago. The HOA handles exterior maintenance and shared spaces. Monthly fee is $510. I wasn't really listening. Not because he was saying anything wrong, but because I was standing at that window with my hands at my sides and something was happening inside my chest that I didn't have the right word for. Not happiness exactly. Something older and quieter. Recognition, maybe the feeling of looking at a place and knowing it in your body before your mind has caught up. Knowing you could rest here. Hector came and stood beside me. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked out the same window. "Well," he said finally. "Yeah," I said. I pushed open the sliding glass door and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cooler up here, dry and sharp with sage, and the city below was just starting to pick up the full weight of the morning sun. I put both hands on the railing and stood there breathing it in. Behind me, I heard Eckhart say quietly to Hector, "Does he want a few minutes?" And Hector said, "He's fine, he's thinking." That was exactly right. I wasn't thinking about square footage or HOA fees or the logistics of packing up a house. I was thinking about Norma saying, once years ago, on a Sunday drive through these same hills, that she figured people who lived up high must see things differently, must carry a different relationship to all the noise and hurry down below. I had laughed and said something sensible about property taxes. I turned around and went back inside. "Mr. Eckhart," I said. "I'll take it." Eckhart blinked once. "You'd like to schedule a second visit?" "No," I said. "I don't need to come back. I have $310,000 in a savings account, and I want to pay cash. How fast can we close?" Eckhart looked at Hector. Hector studied the ceiling with the expression of a man working hard not to smile. "Cash transaction," Eckhart said, steadying himself. "Clear title we could potentially close in 10 to 14 days. "Then let's get the paperwork going today," I said. We spent 40 minutes at the kitchen table working through the initial documents. I signed where Eckhart directed and initialed where he pointed. When it was done, and Eckhart had gathered his folder and gone outside to make calls, Hector leaned back in his chair and looked at me across the table. "How do you feel?" he asked, which wasn't like him, but this wasn't a usual kind of morning. "Like I can breathe," I said. Hector nodded, slow and deliberate. "Good," he said. "It's about time." On the way back down, I took out my phone and typed a message to Eli, my grandson Renee's son, 19 years old. and the only person in my family who had called me on my birthday last year without needing to be reminded. Can you come by this week? I need to tell you something. His reply came before we reached the bottom of the hill. Of course, Grandpa. Everything okay? I looked at that question for a long moment. Then I wrote back, it's going to be. The coffee at Clifton Navarre's office was always better than it had any right to be. That was the first thing I noticed when his assistant showed me in on Monday morning. The smell of it cutting right through the particular staleness that gathers in rooms full of paper and leather-bound books. Clifton kept a small coffee maker on the credenza behind his desk. A real one, not a pod machine, and he ground the beans himself each morning, which I knew because he had told me so. The first time I set foot in his office 5 years ago, 2 weeks after Norma's funeral. Clifton Navarre was 63 years old, a slender man with reading glasses he wore, pushed up on his forehead, and a way of listening that made you feel like the only person whose words mattered without him ever having to work at it. We had met at St. Anthony's in the West Side, where I had been going to Mass on and off for 30 years, where Norma and I had been married, where we had buried her. Clifton had been a parishioner there since his own wife passed in 2017. We'd ended up at the same coffee hour after the same Sunday service and found we were both widowers who would rather talk about practical matters than feelings which made us comfortable with each other right away. He had handled Norma's estate. He had done it carefully, thoroughly, and for less than he should have charged, and when I thanked him for it, he said he would rather do good work for people he respected than expensive work for people he didn't. I trusted Clifton Navarre the way you trust a man whose character you have watched under pressure. Sit down, Eugene, he said when I came in, already reaching for the coffee pot. You sounded serious on the phone. I am serious, I said. I sat across from his desk and took the coffee. Then I told him everything. The dinner, Brody's words at the table, the message in the group chat, the supplemental card, the condo in the Ozark Highlands. I told him about the 31 years in the house on Troost Avenue, about the three $10,000 in savings, about the fact that Norma and I had purchased that house 8 months before we were married, and that the deed had always carried my name alone. Clifton listened without once interrupting. He made 2 small notes on the yellow legal pad in front of him. Nothing more, just brief marks to anchor his attention. When I finished, he set his pen down and looked at me across the desk. Does Brody know any of this? He asked. The savings, the condo, any of it? No, I said, and I want it to stay that way until everything is settled. Clifton nodded slowly. The house, he said. You're certain about the deed? I have the original documents in a fireproof box in the storage room, I said. Purchased August 1987. Norma and I married April 1988. Her name was never added to the deed. We talked about it once and she said it didn't matter, that it was our home, regardless of what the paper said. She was right that it was your home, Clifton said. And she was right that the paper is what matters legally. In this state, property acquired before marriage is separate property. Brody has no legal claim on that house, and he cannot contest a sale. You don't need his knowledge, his permission, or his signature. Something eased in my chest when he said that. Not in any dramatic way, not the way it happens in films, but in the small practical way that pressure drops when you finally have a clear answer to something you've been carrying. I want to list it, I said. Fair market value, whatever that brings. I'll put you in touch with a solid agent, Clifton said. Someone I know who works East Kansas City properties, honest, no games. Based on current comps in that area, I'd estimate somewhere between 400 and 450. He paused. Now the other matter. The will, I said. The will, he confirmed. He opened a folder on his desk, one he had evidently prepared after my call that morning. You have a current will that divides your estate equally between Brody and Renee. You want to change that? Desto, it is no way skursto. I want to change that. I said, I want Eli to receive the primary share, 60%. Renee gets 30, Brody gets 10, but only if he doesn't contest it. Clifton looked up from the folder. You want a no contest clause? I want a no contest clause, I said. Walk me through how that works here. This state enforces no contest clauses, Clifton said, leaning forward slightly the way he did when he needed something to land precisely. It means that if a beneficiary challenges the will in court and the court rules against them, they forfeit whatever share they were originally given. In your case, if Brody contests and loses his 10% goes to zero. It doesn't pass to the other beneficiaries. It simply disappears. That's fine, I said. It's a significant incentive not to file, Clifton said. Assuming Brody has legal counsel worth anything, they'll tell him exactly the same thing. No contest clauses aren't absolute protection, but they hold in most circumstances, particularly when the person making the will is clearly of sound mind and the document is properly executed. I am clearly of sound mind, I said. Clifton almost smiled. That is my professional assessment as well, he said. We spent the next 40 minutes working through the documentation. Clifton walked me through each section before I signed it, the way a man who genuinely wants you to understand something explains it rather than pushing past the parts that are complicated. The deed transfer authorization for the listing, the preliminary will amendment, the powers of attorney update which would replace the old one Brody had apparently been holding since the year after Norma died. That last item stayed with me for a moment. The old POA, I said. The one Brody holds. Revoked as of today, Clifton said. He'll receive formal written notification by mail within 3 business days. In the meantime, I'd recommend contacting your bank and your insurance provider directly and flagging any recent changes made under that authorization. I thought about what Hector had said on the phone Saturday afternoon, the thing he had been meaning to tell me, the thing about the life insurance. That conversation hadn't been finished yet, but Clifton's words settled into me like a stone dropped into still water. I'll do that today, I said. When I rose to leave, Clifton walked me to the door himself, which he didn't always do. At the threshold, he stopped and looked at me with the plain concern of a man who doesn't dress things up. Eugene, he said, you're doing the right thing. I know, I said. My phone buzzed as I reached the elevator, a text from Hector, 4 words that landed like cold water when you aren't braced for it. Eugene, call me now. I was still in the elevator when I dialed him back. The doors hadn't closed yet, and my thumb was already pressing Hector's name on the screen, moving faster than the composure I had been holding all morning. 4 words in a text from Hector Ibanez carried weight. Hector was not a man who fired off urgent messages over nothing. In 39 years, I had received exactly 2 texts from him in that register, and both times it had been about something that genuinely mattered. He picked up before the first ring finished. Where are you? He asked. Elevator, Clifton's building. What happened? You need to sit down for this. Okay, I heard him exhale. You remember my neighbor Reyes, the one on the corner, with the brown truck his brother-in-law works at Midland National Life, Hector said. The insurance company, your insurance company, Eugene. He wasn't going to say a word privacy rules, but he told me enough that I'm telling you to call them directly today right now before anything else. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. I walked out and found a chair along the wall near the entrance. One of those chairs that exist in office lobbies for exactly this kind of moment when a person has to sit down and can't make it any farther. Tell me, I said. About 8 months ago, Hector said, someone used a power of attorney document to request a beneficiary change on your life insurance policy. The primary beneficiary was changed from Eli to Brody. The lobby was cool and quiet around me. A woman in a gray suit passed by with a coffee cup. A man held the door for someone behind him. Everything around me was completely ordinary, and I was sitting in that chair with my heart hammering against my sternum like it was trying to leave the building before I did. Say that again, I said, even though I had caught every word. 8 months ago. Hector spoke with measured calm, the cadence of someone carrying difficult news and choosing to deliver it straight, because that is the decent thing to do. A POA document was presented at Midland National Life, and your primary beneficiary got switched from Eli over to Brody. That policy is worth $220,000, Eugene. $220,000. I'd taken it out in 2000 back when Brody had just turned 10, and Norma had received the diagnosis that would claim her 14 years down the road, 24 years of premiums. 2 years back, I'd moved the beneficiary over to Eli. Because Eli was 19 and pointed towards something, because he remembered birthdays on his own, without anybody nudging him, because he was the sort of young man who ought to have something solid waiting under him when he needed it. And now, somebody had quietly flipped it back to Brody. 8 months ago, while I was still under that same roof, making dinner, handing over the car keys, agreeing to every small favor the way I always had. My hands weren't steady, I'll say that plainly. Laid across my knees, they were trembling, a low, constant shaking, that pressing them down, flat against my legs, did nothing to stop. I pressed them down anyway, and made myself breathe through it. The old POA, I said, the one I put my name to after Norma was gone. Sounds about right, Hector said. When Norma died, I hadn't been in any state to manage the paperwork of grief by myself. Accounts, policies, documents, 100 small decisions. Brody had walked in and handled it quietly and without waiting to be invited. And I had signed over a power of attorney because it was simpler than facing it alone, and because he was my son and I believed in him. That piece of paper had been in his possession ever since 5 years of it sitting there. Apparently, it hadn't just been sitting, Eugene Hector said. You with me? I'm here. Cliff just pulled the POA, I told him, this morning. Good. But you'll need to get on the phone with Midland National Life yourself and flag the unauthorized change. Let them know the POA is gone and you want Eli reinstated as beneficiary right away. They'll lock the account and take you through it step by step. Don't sit on this. I got to my feet. My legs carried me. That counted for something. I'm making that call right now, I said. Hector. Yeah. Did he understand what he was doing when he filed that change? Hector went quiet, and in that silence I could hear every word he was choosing not to say. The considered restraint of a man who'd watched me raise Brody from the outside for 30 years and had come to his own conclusions about what he'd seen. Eugene, he said at last, nobody walks into an insurance office and files paperwork by mistake. I hung up and lowered myself back into the chair. Not because my legs had quit on me, because I needed 60 seconds to let what Hector had just said find its proper weight inside me. 3 days I'd spent slowly shifting my picture of my son, nudging it increment by increment away from what I'd chosen to believe and toward what the facts were telling me. The group chat had been one data point. A man saying ugly things in private is painful, but it's not unheard of. People let words loose they don't entirely own, especially when they're under pressure, especially when they've got an audience. But walking into an insurance office and filing paperwork, that's different. You don't put a legal document in front of someone, sign your name beneath it, and then claim it slipped your mind. That takes deliberate thought. That takes staring at a $220,000 policy and making a conscious choice about where it goes. I thought about Eli, 19 years old, picking up part-time work, studying business over at UMKC. I thought about a conversation we'd had 3 years back when he told me his dream was to open his own place someday. Something hands-on, maybe restoring old cars, and the way his face had opened up, talking about it, the way young faces do. When the dream is actually theirs, and not just something they think they're supposed to want. I dialed Midland National Life. The woman who picked up was composed and gave me her full attention. I walked her through it, methodically, policy number, date of birth, my mother's maiden name. I told her there was reason to believe a beneficiary change had gone through without my authorization, and that I needed it reviewed immediately. She put me on hold. Whatever was playing through the speaker was soft and unmemorable. I stayed in that lobby chair, eyes on the marble floor, and waited. 4 minutes later, she was back. Mr. Callard, I can confirm that a beneficiary change was processed on December 9th of last year under a power of attorney authorization. We are noting your dispute as of today's date. I'll transfer you to our policy services team to begin the restoration process. This will require your signature on a notarized correction form, which we can send electronically. Email it to me, I said. Today. Absolutely, she said. Is there anything else I can help you with? Through the glass lobby doors, I watched the street carry on, an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, indifferent, moving along at its usual pace with no idea what was unfolding in this chair, inside this body that had put in 68 years of hard work and was only now starting to see clearly what all of it had been for. No, I said, that's all. The moment the insurance company's email landed, I forwarded it straight to Cliff, one line attached. Add this to the file. I sat a moment longer, then not looking at anything in particular, and let the anger run its course through me, the way a storm rolls through and you don't chase it off. You just wait while it moves, until what it leaves behind is something quieter and harder and more of use. Then I got up, stepped out into the afternoon light, and pointed the truck toward home. I spotted it from half a block out. I'd been on the road since 7 that morning, out to the UPS store on Slauson, to mail a certified copy of the correction form to Midland National Life's processing center in Des Moines, even though the representative had said the electronic version was enough. But Cliff had said, send a physical copy too. And when Cliff said a thing like that, you didn't debate it. I swung back onto Troost Avenue at 9:45, my mind already on the coffee I'd pour once I was through the door. And that's when I noticed the tables. 2 folding tables open on the front lawn, boxes lined up the length of the driveway. Clothes hung on a portable garment rack. I knew immediately it was the one Norma had used for her sewing, the one that had stood unused in the back of the storage room for 4 years now. A hand-lettered sign fixed to the mailbox read, "Yard Sale," and below that, smaller, "Everything Must Go." I eased the truck up to the curb and sat there with the engine idling. On the table nearest to me, I could make out tools. My tools, the pipe wrenches I'd hauled in my work truck for 22 years. The ones with the red handles that Norma had given me one Christmas as a joke, because she said I talked about pipe wrenches the way other men talked about golf clubs. A level. 2 sets of channel lock pliers. A voltage tester Hector had handed me the day I retired, the handle engraved with the words, "Last Job," which was Hector's version of a retirement card. Lacey stood near the far end of the tables, in a white linen top and dark sunglasses, talking to a woman I'd never seen before, who had one of Norma's ceramic mixing bowls raised in both hands, tilting it to look at the bottom. I cut the engine. I covered the distance to the tables on foot, moving deliberately not out of calm, but because something had gone strange in my legs beneath me. That leaden quality that settles in when your body has understood the situation, and your mind is still a step behind. I went past the pipe wrenches and didn't reach for them. Past the level, past the voltage tester. I worked my way along the near table, each object another specific pull of memory, until I came to the far end and stopped. The wooden box was sitting there. Small cedar roughly the size of a shoebox, a plain brass latch across the front. I'd built it myself in 1993 on a Saturday afternoon, out in the garage, while Brody, 7 years old that year, stood beside me handing over pieces of sandpaper and asking questions about everything in sight. Inside it, Norma had kept what she always called her keeping things, a silver bracelet that had belonged to her mother, the hospital bracelet from the morning Brody came into the world, 2 stubs from the first film we ever watched together, a photograph of her parents standing together on their wedding day, and a letter I'd written her early on before we were married, when everything between us was still new, written out by hand on yellow paper. I hadn't gone back and read it since the day she died. I couldn't. I lifted the box off the table. My hands were shaking and I made no effort to still them. Not this time. "Oh, Eugene." Lacey materialized at my side, her voice carrying that particular forced brightness people reach for when they've been caught and are hoping a cheerful tone will paper over it. "I was going to bring this up with you. We're just sorting through a few things, getting the place in order. You know how it goes when you're first getting settled." I looked at her. I looked at the box in my hands, then back at her. "This box," I said, and the words came out quieter than I meant, "rougher, this belonged to my wife." Of course, she said, words coming fast. Of course, anything with sentimental value, we can absolutely set that aside. I just assumed since it was all in storage. It was in storage, I told her, because I had nowhere else to put it after she died, not because it was available for sale. Lacey opened her mouth and let it close again without a word. From the yard next door came the slam of a screen door. I looked up. Berta Quintero was making her way down her front steps, 72 years old, in the same house dress she'd worn on her porch in some version of every morning across the 25 years we'd been neighbors. Berta had brought food to my door for 3 weeks after Norma's funeral. Berta had watched Brody grow up from the other side of a chain-link fence, and she had told me more than once in the careful way of a woman who weighs every word that she had concerns about the man he was becoming. She came to the low fence dividing our properties and took in the tables. She looked at Lacey. She looked at me at the cedar box in my arms. "Eugene," she said. Her voice was soft, and it wasn't a question. "Onwarding, Berta," I said. She looked back at the yard sale spread, absorbing it, the way a woman of 72 who has witnessed a great deal of life absorbs something that requires no explanation. Her jaw went tight. She shook her head. Once a small, exact motion, the kind that delivers an entire verdict without a single word. "You need anything," she said. "You come over." "I know," I said. "Thank you." I turned toward the house, the cedar box held against my chest with both arms. The way you carry something that cannot be replaced. Lacey called after me, something about the other things still on the table, something about not having realized something about being reasonable. I didn't break stride. I went through the front door, through the living room, down the hallway to the storage room, and I set the box back on its shelf where it belonged. I stood with one hand resting on the lid for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Eli a message. "Bring your truck on Saturday. I have things to move." His reply arrived in under a minute, the way his replies always did, with the immediacy of someone who understood that when I asked for something, It wasn't a casual ask. "I'll be there at 8, Grandpa. Whatever you need." I slid the phone into my pocket. I stood there looking at the cedar box on the shelf. I thought about Norma laughing from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder, watching me sand the edges of a table I was building for the two of us. "Whatever you need." It was the first time in a long while that I was beginning to understand what those words actually meant when someone pointed them at me. She knocked at 2:15 in the afternoon, not the blunt, impatient knock Brody used when he wanted something, the kind that hit a door like a small demand. This was something else. 3 even taps softly spaced the sort of knock that had been rehearsed until it came across as natural. I was sitting on the edge of the cot in the storage room with the cedar box across my lap, not lifting the lid, just keeping my hands on top of it. The way you hold on to something you're relieved still exists. I set the box aside and opened the door. Lacey was standing in the hallway in a different outfit from the morning, a pale blue dress hair, loose a small purse on her shoulder. She was wearing the smile I'd seen her use at Brody's work events when she needed something from someone she had no genuine warmth for. Technically, it was effective. The right number of teeth showing, and it came close to reaching her eyes. "Eugene," she said, voice warm, as though the morning had simply not occurred, as though she hadn't been standing in my front yard 2 hours ago, selling Norma's mixing bowls to a woman she'd never met. "I was hoping we could talk. All right? I feel terrible about this morning," she said. "I honestly didn't understand how much those things meant to you. I should have asked first. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry." She delivered it the way people deliver sorry, when what they mean is, "I'm sorry. This is creating a complication for me." I'd heard that particular kind of apology enough, across 68 years, to know exactly how it was built. "Thank you," I said, "because acknowledging an apology costs nothing and gives nothing away. I want to make it up to you," she said. And her voice shifted here, dropping into something softer, almost confiding, like someone letting you in on something pleasant. "There's a spa in Leawood I've been going to for years. The Raphael Spa. They have a day package massage facial that really delivers. I thought we could go together this afternoon. My treat." She let a beat pass the right length of pause. "I think it would be good for us to spend some real time together, just the two of us before the wedding." I studied her for a moment. I thought about the insurance policy. I thought about the group chat message on Brody's phone. I thought about the cedar box on the shelf behind me, Norma's bracelet inside it, and the hospital bracelet, and the letter I had written on yellow paper when I was still young. "All right," I said. "Give me 10 minutes." The drive to Leawood took 40 minutes through afternoon traffic. Lacey drove at the wheel of her silver Audi, the air conditioning dialed to a temperature that made me feel like something being kept fresh. She talked most of the way about the wedding venue they were considering, about Chloe from her office who had just gotten engaged, about a restaurant her father had recently opened in the Crossroads Arts District. I said the right things at the right moments and watched the neighborhood scroll past through the passenger window. The Raphael Spa was everything Leawood understood itself to be. Marble floors, staff in matching linen uniforms, who kept their voices just above a whisper. The scent of eucalyptus, and underneath it, something else, something costly and understated that probably had a French name. A young woman at the front desk called Lacey by name and handed us each a robe and slippers in a monogram bag. The treatments themselves, I won't pretend, were unpleasant. A good massage is a good massage, regardless of the circumstances around it. My lower back, which had been lodging complaints since the first night on that cot in the storage room, was genuinely grateful for the attention. I lay in the dim treatment room, with the appropriate music filtering through, and I thought about Clifton Navarre and Eckhart the real estate agent, and the paperwork working its way through the proper channels without Brody's knowledge, and I felt something that came close to peace. Afterward, Lacey and I settled into the relaxation lounge in our robes, 2 glasses of cucumber water on the low table between us. She was talking about the facial, about a particular product the esthetician had worked into her skin, and I was following along with the part of my attention that could be spared when she reached across and lifted a small leather folder that a staff member had set down quietly beside us. She opened it, she looked at the number inside, then she pushed it across the table toward me with one finger, the gesture meant to look offhand. The total was $840. "They really outdid themselves today," Lacey said pleasantly, her gaze drifting toward the window. I picked up the folder. I looked at the total. I placed it back on the table and folded my hands on top of my robe. "Lacey," I said. She was still watching the window. "You said this was your treat." She turned back to me, wearing an expression of mild surprise, as if the exact words she had used had momentarily escaped her. Well, I meant, I arranged everything. I just thought, since it's your home and all that, you might want to. No, I said. The word dropped into the room and stayed there. From the corner of my eye, I saw the young woman at the reception desk glance up from her screen. A staff member standing near the door went very still. I'm not covering this, I said at a volume that was entirely conversational and could be heard clearly by everyone within 15 feet. What I'm about to share is the moment I stopped wondering and started knowing exactly what had been happening behind my back and by whom. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you suspected someone close to you was quietly working against you, would you say something right away? Or would you wait and let the truth come out on its own? You told me this was your treat. If you'd like to settle the bill, I'll wait for you out front. If that's not possible, I'd suggest you phone Brody. Lacey's face cycled through several expressions in quick succession, the way a card player's face moves when they realize the hand they're holding isn't what they thought it was. The warmth fell away first. Then the composure fractured slightly at the edges, a tightening around the eyes, a jaw that went rigid for one unguarded beat before she pulled herself back together. That's very embarrassing, Eugene, she said, keeping her voice low. Yes, I agreed pleasantly enough. I imagine so. I got to my feet, gathered my monogrammed bag with my clothes in it, and made my way to the changing room with my back straight and my head up. I changed, folded the robe, set the slippers neatly on top of it, the way the sign on the wall requested, and walked out through the lobby. I waited on the sidewalk in the late afternoon sun. It took Lacey 11 minutes to appear. She said nothing, the whole drive home. I didn't ask her to. As we turned into the driveway, my phone buzzed against my leg. A message from the real estate agent Cliff had put me in touch with a man named Tate Fuentes. Mr. Callard, we have our first showing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10:00. Buyers look serious. I read it twice. Then I put the phone away and climbed out of the car. Brody's text arrived Thursday evening, while I was eating alone at the kitchen table. House needs to look good tomorrow. Lacey's parents are coming at 4. Make sure everything is clean. I read it twice, not because the meaning was hard to follow, but because I wanted to be sure I had the tone right. Not a question, not a request. A directive sent to me in my own house about the cleanliness of rooms I had maintained for 31 years, without anyone's instruction. I set the phone face down and finished my soup. I had spent Thursday morning with Tate Fuentes, the agent Cliff had connected me with, walking through the house while Brody and Lacey were both out. Tate was a compact man in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a yellow legal pad moving through each room and making notes with the efficient thoroughness of someone who had done this thousands of times and still brought care to every one of them. He told me the house was in excellent structural shape, kitchen and bathrooms dated but clean, and that in the current East Kansas City market, a move-in ready property like this would pull serious interest quickly. I'd list at $425, he said, when the walkthrough wrapped up, standing in the backyard near Norma's lemon tree. You might get $450 if the first buyers are motivated. Listed, I said. The listing went live Thursday afternoon. I knew because Tate sent me the link, and I pulled it up on my phone and looked at the photographs of my house, the rooms I had painted and repainted across 3 decades, the kitchen where Norma had taught Brody to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, the backyard where I had built a wooden sandbox for him in 1993, that eventually became a garden bed once he outgrew it. The photographs made the house look like somewhere a stranger lived, which I suppose by then was close enough to accurate. Now, it was Friday at 4:00. I was sitting in the backyard with a glass of iced tea when I heard the cars arrive out front. I stayed put for a few minutes, listening to the voices at the door, that particular register of social performance people adopt. When they're meeting family, they need to impress. Then I stood up, came inside through the back door, washed my glass at the sink, and walked into the living room. Harlan Dunmore was not what I had expected. I'd assembled an image of him in my mind from the scraps Brody and Lacey had let fall over the months Leewood restaurateur's old money, the kind of man who wore his wealth like cologne as a declaration of who he took himself to be. The man standing in my living room was in his early 60s, broad-shouldered with a firm jaw, and the sort of tan that came from genuine time outdoors rather than a booth. He had on a sport coat over a plain shirt, no tie, and he looked around the room with eyes that were direct and measuring without being hostile. His wife Phyllis was a composed woman in a cream-colored blouse who shook my hand warmly and said she had loved the lemon tree she'd spotted in the backyard. Brody stood in the middle of the room, slightly flushed, talking a little too fast the way he always did, when he was nervous and trying not to let it show. He'd put himself together carefully, new shirt hair, combed the version of himself he constructed when the audience mattered to him. I said hello to Harlan and Phyllis. I shook Harlan's hand. It was the handshake of a man who had spent his entire working life dealing with people and had long since learned that a grip told you something. Then Brody said it. He said it the way people say things they've been sitting with long enough that it no longer registers to them as something that ought not to be said aloud. He glanced at me, then back at Harlan with a small, easy smile, the smile of a son signaling to his fiance's father that he runs a certain kind of household. "Don't mind him," Brody said. "He's the handyman. He helps around the house." The room didn't go quiet so much as it went still, the way a room goes still when something has been said that can't be taken back and everyone present is working out what they just heard. Harlan Dunmore looked at me. Phyllis Dunmore looked at Brody. Lacey looked at the floor. I looked at my son. I didn't say anything. I want to be precise about that. I had no response ready and I didn't go looking for one because what I felt in that moment wasn't the hot surge of anger, but something colder and more clarifying. The sensation of a last remaining uncertainty being put to rest. Throughout all the preceding days, I had been quietly asking myself whether I was perhaps misreading things, whether my conclusions about who my son had become were perhaps too absolute. He had just answered that. From outside came the sound of a screen door, then footsteps crossing the porch. And then Berta Quintero stepped into the open doorway, with the unhurried authority of a woman who had been watching this neighborhood for 50 years, and knew when a moment required a witness. She looked at Harlan Dunmore. She looked at Brody. She looked at me. "That man," she said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had decided exactly what needed saying and was going to say it without any decoration. "Raised that boy alone for 30 years. Built this house with his own 2 hands, fixed half the pipes on this street when people couldn't pay. Don't you let anybody in this room tell you different." She held Harlan Dunmore's gaze for a moment. Harlan Dunmore held hers back with the expression of a man quietly revising several things he'd assumed. Then Berta looked at me, gave one firm nod, turned around, and walked back across the porch to her own house. The silence she left behind her was the loudest thing I'd been in the presence of in weeks. Harlan Dunmore cleared his throat. He looked at Brody, and the warmth that had been there 2 minutes ago was entirely gone from his face. "Is that true?" he asked. "Did your father build this house?" Brody's mouth came open. Nothing came out of it. "Renovated it," I said pleasantly because the truth was worth stating with accuracy. "Original structure was already here. I handled the plumbing, most of the electrical, with a friend the kitchen in '03. Harlan looked at Brody for another moment. Then he looked at me. "That's real work," he said quietly. That evening after the Dunmores had gone, and Brody and Lacey had retreated upstairs with the contained, pressurized quality of 2 people who had a great deal to say to each other and were holding it until they were alone. My phone rang. Eli's name was on the screen. "Grandpa," he said, and he sounded careful the way young people sound, when something they've heard has put them on edge. "Dad called me tonight. He was asking about your savings account, whether I knew how much you had in it. Be careful." "Okay." I stood in the kitchen where I had made 10,000 meals and looked at the lemon tree through the window. "I know," I said. "Thank you, Eli. Is everything going to be okay?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The first call came at 8:14 in the morning. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee and the Monday edition of the Kansas City paper, which I still had delivered in print, because Norma had set up the subscription back in 1996, and I had never gotten around to canceling it. At some point, it stopped being something. You cancel, it becomes one of the last threads tying the morning to what mornings used to feel like. The number on the screen was one I didn't recognize. A323 area code? Local. I picked up. Eugene. A woman's voice, uncertain, the voice of someone who wasn't sure they had the right number. Eugene Callard speaking. "This is Lorena Pacheco from down on 62nd Street. We met at the block party a few years back. I used to see your wife out in the garden." I remembered her vaguely, a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain who had brought a pasta salad to that block party and stayed to the end helping with the cleanup. "I remember," I said. "Good morning, Lorena." "Eugene, I'm calling because I came across something online this morning and I wasn't sure if you were aware of it." She paused, and in that pause I could hear her measuring her words the way people do when they're carrying news they'd rather not have to deliver. There's a page, a fundraising page. It has your name on it and your picture. I set my coffee cup down. What kind of page, I asked, though? Something in my gut had already formed an answer. It says, "You lost your pension," Lorena said. "It says you're elderly and struggling, and that you might lose your home. It's asking people to donate." Eugene, it already has almost $2,000 on it. I nearly gave money myself before I thought I should probably call you first. I thanked her. I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table for approximately 4 seconds before Berta came through the back door without knocking, which she had done for 25 years, and which I had never once minded holding her phone out toward me, with the screen turned to face me. "Tell me you already know about this," she said. I took the phone from her. The page was titled, "Help Eugene Elderly Father Loses Pension Facing Homelessness." There was a photograph of me. I had no memory of anyone taking candid to me walking toward my truck in the driveway in my work clothes, eyes down, looking at something in my hand. I looked in that photograph like a man carrying something he couldn't put down, which wasn't entirely wrong, but that wasn't the point. The description beneath the photograph read, "My father worked his whole life as a laborer and recently lost his pension due to company restructuring. At 68, he has no safety net and is at risk of losing the family home. Any amount helps. Please share." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time slowly, the way you read something when you are trying to understand, not just what it says, but what it required of the person who wrote it. It required sitting down at a device and typing every one of those words on purpose. It required selecting a photograph and loading it up. It required choosing a title and hitting publish, and then watching the money come in. $2,000 in what appeared to be 4 days based on the timestamp at the top of the page, Eugene Berta said. She was standing at the kitchen counter with her arms folded and her jaw set the same, said it had been 2 days ago in the living room when Brody called me the handyman. The same expression, the one that meant she'd already reached her verdict and was waiting to see whether I had reached mine. "I know," I said. "That boy took money from strangers by lying about you. I know Berta. People who know you, people who would have called me or called the church, they might have given money to that page thinking they were helping you. And instead they were—" "I know," I said again a little more quietly. "I know exactly what it is." I handed her phone back and picked up my own. I went to the GoFundMe site and found the page in under a minute using my own name as the search term, which was a peculiar experience searching for yourself and turning up a version of yourself that someone else had constructed. I found the report function and chose the category for fraudulent fundraising. The form asked me to describe the issue. I typed, "This campaign uses my name photograph and false information without my knowledge or consent. I am the person depicted. I did not authorize this campaign and I am not in the financial situation described. Please remove immediately." I submitted the report. I captured screenshots of the page, the donation total, the timestamp, the description, and the photograph. I sent all of it to Clifton Navarre with a single message. New item for the file. GoFundMe in my name. Fraudulent. Already reported. Screenshots attached. Cliff came back in under 3 minutes. Got it. Preserving for record. Do not contact Brody about this directly. I hadn't planned to. Berta had helped herself to a cup of coffee from my pot also without asking also, something she'd done for years, and was sitting across the table from me with the look of a woman who intended to stay until she was satisfied I wasn't going to do something reckless. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about Lorena Pacheco on 62nd Street, who had nearly sent money to a page designed to take it from her. I thought about others who might have seen it and given people from the church, people from the neighborhood, people who had known Norma and believed they were helping her husband. Nothing I said. Not yet. Berta looked at me over the rim of her cup. "Not yet," she repeated. "The page will come down," I said. "Cliff has everything documented. Every move Brody has made over the past 2 weeks is sitting in that file. I'm not going to confront him about any of it piece by piece because the moment I do, he'll know how much I know. And right now, he doesn't know anything." Berta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Norma always told me you were the most patient man she had ever met. Said it drove her half crazy sometimes." Something tightened in my chest. "She wasn't wrong," I said. She also said, Berta went on setting down her cup, that once you made up your mind about something, nothing on this earth was going to move it. I looked out at the lemon tree through the kitchen window. The morning light was coming through the leaves the way it does in August gold, in particular the kind of light that makes everything appear to be exactly where it belongs. She wasn't wrong about that either. The knock came at 10:47 at night. I know the time precisely because I had just checked my phone to see whether Cliff had responded to the additional documentation I'd sent him that afternoon. A follow-up from the insurance company confirming the beneficiary restoration was being processed. He hadn't replied yet, which was fine. Cliff worked on Clifton's schedule, and that schedule had never yet failed to cover everything that needed covering. 3 knocks, soft and evenly spaced. I recognized them straight away as something apart from every knock Brody had produced in 34 years of living in and out of this house. Brody knocked the way he did most things, operating on the assumption that the door would open because he wanted it to. This knock was asking rather than telling, and the asking alone said something before I'd even left my chair. I opened the door. He was standing in the hallway in a gray t-shirt and jeans, no shoes the way he looked, when there was no one to perform for. His hair was uncombed. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Or maybe they had been there, and I simply hadn't been looking. He was holding a glass of water in one hand with the self-conscious air of a man who needed something to occupy his hands. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back from the doorway. He came in and sat on the edge of the cot, which was the only place to sit, and I stood near the shelf where the cedar box rested and looked at my son in the yellow light of the bare bulb overhead. He looked smaller than he had at the dinner table 11 days ago. Not in size, something else. That particular kind of shrinking that happens when the story a person has been telling themselves about who they are starts showing cracks they can't smooth over. "Dad," he said. He looked at the glass of water in his hand. "I owe you an apology." "All right," I said. "What I said at dinner," he continued. "The way I spoke to you, that was wrong. I know it was wrong. I've been thinking about it every day since." He paused. "Lacey's family has a lot of expectations. Her father, most of all. I've been carrying pressure to keep up appearances, and I turned that on you when I shouldn't have." He delivered it well, I'll say that much. The rhythm of it was right. He held eye contact at the correct moments. Citing pressure as background rather than excuse showed a kind of Polish. 11 days earlier, before the phone screen in the storage room, before Midland National Life, before the fundraising page built around my photograph. And a life I didn't recognize, that speech might have moved something in me. But those 11 days had happened. I had spent them observing my son, watching how he conducted himself, noting the choices he reached for when he assumed no one's eyes were on him. So I stayed where I was, hands resting at my sides, and I let him finish. "I know I've made this harder than it needed to be," he said. "I lean on you more than I should, but you're my father, and I don't want us going on like this." He finally lifted his eyes from the glass. "Tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it." He kept that look trained on me a half beat past what felt natural. And there it was, not in the words which had been selected with care, but in the holding of that gaze and the way he'd angled himself slightly forward, in the simple fact that he was standing in my doorway at 10:47 at night and not at some reasonable hour of the day. Someone genuinely seeking forgiveness considers the other person's convenience. Someone seeking leverage picks the hour when the other person is worn down, when the pull toward a quiet resolution is strongest, when yes costs less than continuing the conversation. "Brody," I said. "Yeah. When did the GoFundMe page get taken down?" His face didn't crack. I'd half thought it might, but it held. What happened instead was a fast-practiced recalibration, the expression of a man who has been caught off balance before and has learned to recover without showing the stumble. What he said. "The page," I said. "The one with my name and my photo on it. The one claiming my pension was gone. When did it disappear?" 1 second of silence, then another. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. I held my gaze on him. He kept his level with mine, and that cost him something. I could read it in the set of his jaw, the controlled flatness he was working to keep across his eyes. "Brody," I said, keeping my voice quiet, "you are not sorry for what came out of your mouth at that dinner table. You are not sorry for what you did with the power of attorney. You are not sorry for choosing that photograph, writing that story, and putting it where strangers could find it and give money to it." I let a moment pass. "You're sorry the card got cut off. Nothing more than that." The color drained from his face, not slowly all at once, the way it goes, when the body grasps the shift in ground before the mind has finished reasoning it out. "Dad." "I'm not angry," I said. And that was the truth, which was maybe the strangest element of all of it. "I'm not angry at you, Brody. What I am is something different. I'm done." He rose from the edge of the cot. The water in the glass trembled as his hand moved. "What does done mean?" What does that actually mean? It means I said that I've already made the decisions that need making about my own life. You'll learn what they are soon enough. Nothing you say in this room tonight reaches any of them. Dad, please. The last word broke in his throat, and for one unguarded instant, something surfaced across his face that was genuine. Something young, something scared. The boy in the garage passing me sheets of sandpaper while I shaped the cedar box. The boy who used to drift off against my shoulder on long drives. Something pulled tight in my chest. "Good night, Brody," I said. He stood there a moment more, the glass still trembling in his grip. Then he turned and left, and I tracked the sound of him going down the hallway up the stairs into the bedroom that had been mine for 30 years. I settled onto the edge of the cot. My phone buzzed against the mattress. A notification email from Cliff's office. I pulled it open. A message from Tate Fuentes forwarded by Cliff with one line attached in front of it. "Eugene Strong offer. Call me in the morning." I read the forwarded message. "Mr. Callard, we have received an offer of 4 ounces full, asking price all cash, requesting close in 10 days. Buyers are highly motivated. Please advise." I read it through twice. Then I set the phone down face first on the cot and sat in the bare bulb yellow of the storage room for a long while, letting the sounds of the house come to me. The sounds it had made every night across 31 years. The creak of the third stair. The precise tick of the hallway baseboard, contracting when the air cooled. I had made this house what it was. The question of what came next for it was mine to answer. I picked the phone back up and sent Tate Fuentes 3 words. "Call me tomorrow." He answered before the first ring finished. It was 7:53, Wednesday morning, and I was out in the backyard, coffee in hand, studying Norma's lemon tree the way I'd been drawn to study it more often lately, as though committing to memory something I'd known for years, but might not always be able to see from here. "Mr. Callard," Tate said. "Glad you're calling early. Talk to me about the buyers," I said. "Young couple," he said. "He's an engineer over at Garmin. She's a nurse at St. Luke's Hospital. 8 months they've been at it. Got edged out twice by cash offers, so they came back swinging with cash of their own. All of it, nothing held back. They've got a baby 6 months old." He let that sit for a moment. "They want this house, Mr. Callard. Not something comparable. This specific one." I stood looking at the lemon tree. Norma had put it in the ground on a Saturday in March of 2002, and I had stood right where my feet were now, cradling the root ball, while she worked the hole down to the depth she had in mind, 4 tries, because she held herself to getting things right before she called them done. We'd had a mild disagreement over whether it was planted too near the fence. I had been mistaken, and she had been correct, as she generally was when it came to anything growing in that yard, and most things beyond it. "Tell them yes," I said. "Full price," Tate asked. "No negotiation. Full price," I said. "They're meeting my number in cash. What would I possibly be countering for?" A short, honest laugh from Tate. "Acceptance paperwork goes out today. Signing is Monday the 18th. That means closing and possession land on Monday the 25th. 10 days to be out." 10 days. I held the figure in my mind, turned it the way you turn something solid in your palm to feel what it weighs. 10 days to clear 31 years out of a house that had held all of them. That sounded like the kind of thing that couldn't be done. And also out there in the morning light, with the air still cool and the tree catching the early sun, it didn't sound that way at all. It sounded like exactly the time I had and exactly enough of it. "Monday the 18th, I said. "I'll be there." Eli showed up Saturday morning at 8:00 on the dot, behind the wheel of a beat-up white pickup that had come down to him from his grandfather on his mother's side, a truck he'd spent the better part of 2 years keeping on the road through a combination of real mechanical skill and the kind of stubbornness that refuses to admit something is finished. 19 years old, my daughter Renee's son, and built the way young men get built when they use their hands for actual work, which he did. Taking weekend shifts at an auto shop out in Independence, where they let him get into the older vehicles the career mechanics wouldn't touch. He came around from the back of the truck and put his hand in mine with a grip that was solid but not making a statement of it, which said more about his character than a long conversation would have. "Grandpa," he said, "where do we begin?" Eli was not someone who needed a situation broken down into steps before he could act. He didn't come at things with questions meant to advertise what he already knew. He looked at what was in front of him, worked out what it required, and got on with it, which is the most genuinely valuable thing a person can be, and in my long experience, the quality in shortest supply. We began in the storage room. The space I'd been sleeping in, where the things that mattered most had ended up around me by accident of proximity rather than any deliberate sorting. The cedar box rode up front between us on the cab seat, not loaded into the truck bed with everything else. Eli clocked it and kept his thoughts to himself, which was the right call. Through the morning, we found a rhythm together, the easy kind that takes shape between people who have no need to talk just to fill up the air. I said what to bring, and he brought it. I said what to leave, and it stayed. The furniture wasn't going anywhere. Tate had pointed out that the buyers were relieved to have it included one less headache for them to sort out on their end. Everything we were hauling away was different. The unreplaceable remnants of a life, objects that carried weight only for the person who had built that life around them. Close to 11, Seared Eli and I took a break on the tailgate of his truck, working through sandwiches I'd put together before dawn. He looked over at me and said, "Mind if I ask you something?" "Ask," I said. "Before that dinner, did you already see this coming? Did you have some kind of plan in place?" I gave that question the honest consideration it deserved. "Not really," I said. "I had money set aside, and I had choices available to me. But a real plan didn't take shape until your uncle showed me what one looked like." Eli held my gaze a beat. "He gave you a reason to use what you already had. There sat my grandson, 19 years old, turkey sandwich in hand, August heat pressing down on both of us. And in a single sentence he had arrived at the thing I'd spent 2 weeks trying to articulate for myself. "That's exactly it," I said. Eli nodded and went back to eating. A moment later, "You should have walked out years ago, Grandpa." No edge to it, no accusation. Just the blunt landing of a true thing delivered by someone who sees no virtue in softening what's plainly accurate. "You're probably right," I said. "Not probably," Eli said. Something loosened in me then, and I laughed. It rose from a place I hadn't reached in some time. A real laugh, unscheduled, unforced, the genuine article. Eli's face opened into a quiet smile, the kind that belongs to a young man who has just managed to do something he didn't know he could do. We made 2 runs out to the storage facility I'd secured the week before, in Raytown, a climate-controlled unit on La Cienega, that Eli had tracked down for me the previous Wednesday evening, sitting beside me, with his phone scrolling through listings, with the brisk efficiency his generation treats as ordinary. The space was 12 by 12, which was more than enough to hold everything I was bringing to the condo. On the way back from the second run, turning onto Troost Avenue, Eli said it softly, "He's at the window, watching." I kept my eyes off the house. "I figured," I said. We finished unloading. Eli helped me secure the lock, and I slipped the key into my pocket. The drive back was quiet, the truck bed bare, the long August afternoon tipping toward evening. "For whatever it's worth," Grandpa Eli said after a while, "I think you're doing the right thing, not only because of what he pulled, but because of what you've earned." Something clamped down in my throat that I hadn't braced for. "I appreciate that, Eli," I said. One nod, his focus back on the road. We covered the remaining miles without another word, the easy silence between 2 people who have already said the part that mattered. Back inside the house, I passed the living room, and something snagged my attention. The top drawer of the small writing desk in the corner was sitting an inch open. I had left it closed that morning. I was certain of it. I pulled the drawer out fully. The papers hadn't been ransacked, nothing scattered or removed, just quietly rearranged, the sequence I maintained no longer intact. I stood over them, reading what that meant. I pushed the drawer shut, walked to the storage room, and lowered myself onto the cot. Monday, I told myself. 48 more hours. The next morning, I surfaced at 5:30. No alarm needed, hovering for a few seconds in the gray half-light before my mind caught up. For those seconds, I had no idea where I was. The ceiling sat too close overhead. The air carried all the wrong things, motor oil, cardboard, instead of the layered scent of walnut wood and old plaster, and 30 years of accumulated living that had been the smell of my bedroom through most of my adult life. Then memory reassembled itself the way it did every morning, now storage room, cot, bare yellow bulb, and riding in behind all of it, the full reckoning of how I'd gotten here and what today was going to be. I stood up. I used the hallway bathroom running the shower at a murmur, so as not to rouse Brody and Lacey in the next room, not as any courtesy to them, simply because I had no appetite for whatever exchange they might have wanted. This morning didn't belong to anyone who couldn't grasp what it meant. It was mine. I held my own reflection in the mirror for a long moment. 68 years old. The gray had taken everything, now the last traces of brown had quietly given way sometime in the years following Norma's death. The creases at my eyes, at the corners of my mouth, the hands of a man who had worked with them for 4 decades and felt no regret about a single day of it. I had been a plumber. I had gone into people's homes and repaired what was broken, and there was not 1 hour of that work I would have traded away. I returned to the storage room and put myself together with care. Dark slacks, a white button-down I'd pressed the night before, and the gray sport coat Norma had chosen for me at Macy's in 2018, the anniversary dinner we never made it to, because that week had been one of the hard ones near the end. And instead, we'd sat at our own kitchen table with candles between us. The jacket had come out once after that when I went to Clifton's office to deal with Norma's estate papers. This morning made the second time. I checked myself in the narrow mirror mounted on the storage room door. The man looking back at me appeared to have somewhere important to be. That was correct. Hector was at the curb by 8:55, which put him 5 minutes ahead of schedule, early being his particular expression of punctuality. His truck had been through a wash. He hadn't brought it up, but I caught it immediately, and it registered more deeply than any words would have. I stepped out with my document folder tucked under one arm. Hector climbed down and came up the walk to meet me, and his eyes found mine the same way they had for 39 years running. That straight, unvarnished look, the look of a man who has never needed language when his expression does the work. "Ready?" he asked. "Been ready," I said. The title company was downtown on Main Street, a bright, orderly office glass-walled conference room, carrying the smell of fresh coffee and new carpet. Tate Fuentes was waiting. When we walked in, positioned near the front desk in a charcoal blazer, composed and attentive, those same sharp eyes from the walkthrough still taking everything in. He put out his hand and said, "Mr. Callard, today's a good day." "Yes," I said, "it is." They led us back to the conference room. The closing agent was a woman named Beverly Crane, reading glasses hanging from a cord at her collarbone, and the settled, unrushed manner of someone who has walked a great many people through exactly this kind of room. She offered coffee and water and laid the documents out in precise stacks across the table. Darius Colton and his wife came through the door 3 minutes after we sat down. He was 34 years old, tall, carrying the particular gravity of a person who has aimed at something for a very long time and still can't quite trust that it's real. His wife Alicia was slight and bright-faced, a blue dress their daughter strapped against her chest in a soft carrier, the baby's cheek resting flat and warm against her mother's collarbone, sound asleep. Darius Colton reached his hand across the table, and I met it. "Mr. Callard," he said, "thank you for accepting our offer." "Thank you for making it," I said. Alicia Colton looked at me across her daughter's sleeping head and smiled. "We searched for such a long time," she said. The moment we stepped into the backyard and I spotted the lemon tree, I turned to Darius and said, "That's the one, right there." Something moved through my chest. Norma's lemon tree, the one she'd put into the ground on a Saturday in March while I steadied the root ball, and we went back and forth, not quite arguing about how close to the fence it should go. That tree had been throwing off more lemons than one man could possibly get through for 5 years now. It was passing into the keeping of a family. "She's going to love it," I said with a glance at the sleeping baby. "When she's older," Beverly Crane began. She walked us through each document in turn, with the methodical care of a woman who understood that for most of the people who sat across from her, this was the largest financial transaction they would ever make, and that precision was its own form of regard. She explained every section before a pen-touched paper. I signed my name, Eugene Callard, in the cursive I had been taught in 3rd grade and kept faithfully for every decade since 23 times across the full spread of documents. When the last signature was done, Beverly Crane collected the executed set and excused herself to have certified copies made. Hector, who had spent the whole proceeding in the chair along the wall, the chair set aside for those with no role to play, now leaned in elbows dropping to his knees, eyes finding me across the table. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Darius Colton and Alicia had slipped into the hallway with the baby, giving us a moment to ourselves, a gracious thing I hadn't anticipated. "Like something has closed," I said, "and something else is opening up." Hector gave a slow nod. Tate Fuentes came back into the room alongside Beverly Crane, who placed a cashier's check on the table and pushed it toward me with 2 fingers. $428,000. I picked it up and held it with both hands, studying it. Not the number which I already knew, but the physical reality of the thing. What it means when a slip of paper carries the weight of 31 years of mortgage payments and upkeep and the long accumulated choice to plant yourself somewhere and build something from it. I had built something. This was what the world said it was worth. Hector rose and set his hand on my shoulder. Brief, firm nothing said, and that was exactly right. Darius Colton returned and we shook hands again at the door. Same grip as before, solid, not performative. "Sir," he said, "we're gonna take good care of that place." I took him in. 34 years old engineer at Garmin wife and a blue dress baby asleep against her chest. The same age Brody had been when he'd started clipping his words at people and learning to work a room. "I know you will," I said. "That's why I chose you." Darius Colton smiled, and it was the smile of a man who understood what that sentence had taken to say, which told me he was going to be fine, and the house was going to be fine, and the lemon tree Norma had planted was going to be fine. Out on Main Street, Hector walked with me to the truck through the late morning heat. He got the doors unlocked, but neither of us moved to climb in just yet. We stood on the sidewalk while Kansas City on a Monday morning pushed and flowed around us. Everyone with somewhere to be. "Lunch," Hector said. "Yeah," I said. "Somewhere decent." Hector almost smiled. "I know a place." I settled into the truck with the cashier's check tucked inside the pocket of Norma's anniversary jacket resting against my chest, and I watched the street through the windshield. Tonight, I thought. Tonight, I tell them. I pulled into the driveway at 6:12 in the evening. Hector and I had spent the afternoon at a Mexican place he knew on York Boulevard in Waldo, red vinyl booths, hand-painted tiles on the walls. A woman behind the counter who knew Hector's name and set down chips before he had asked for them. We ate slowly and talked about things that had nothing to do with Brody or the house or the 3 weeks that had just ground through me. Hector talked about his nephew, who was picking up welding. I talked about the tile work I had in mind for the bathroom of the new condo. We had churros for dessert and split the bill down the middle, as we had been splitting bills for 39 years. It had been a good lunch. I'd needed one badly. Both vehicles were parked in the driveway when I pulled up. Brody's Nissan and Lacey's silver Audi sitting side by side in the spot that used to hold my work truck and Norma's Camry. I cut the engine and sat for a moment looking at the house through the glass. The porch light was burning. The living room window threw the pale blue-white glow of a television. 31 years I had lived behind that window. I reached into the inside pocket of Norma's jacket and touched the cashier's check. Still there. Then I stepped out, climbed the porch steps, and went inside. Brody was on the couch, laptop open in front of him. Lacey was in the armchair with her phone. Both heads came up when I walked in. Brody's face carried the particular strain it had been wearing for the past several days, ever since that exchange in the storage room. The look of a man who knows something is off without yet being able to name how badly or in which direction it's going to break. I set my document folder on the dining room table. "Brody," I said. "Lacey, come sit with me, please. I need to say something to you both." Something in how I said it got through because Brody folded his laptop shut without a word, and Lacey laid her phone face down on the armrest. They came to the table and settled across from me side by side. I sat down facing them, folder in front of me, both hands flat on the table. I looked at my son, 34 years old. The boy I had carried out of St. Luke's Hospital on a Tuesday in October, so small he'd fit in the crook of one arm. The boy who had run circles around my legs while I sanded the walnut table in this very room. Who had handed me sandpaper in the garage and asked questions about everything, whose eyes had gone wide the first time he'd watched me sweat a copper joint and seen the solder run into the fitting like something close to magic. I had loved that boy with everything in me. I still did. Nothing about that had changed, and nothing was going to. But love and enabling were not the same thing, and I had spent far too many years reaching for one word when I should have been reaching for the other. "I sold the house," I said. The room didn't go quiet so much as it simply stopped. For roughly 2 seconds, Brody's face held no expression at all, which was itself an expression. The look of someone whose mind has just taken in something it doesn't yet have a framework for. What he said. "I sold the house," I said again, same words, same register. "I signed everything this morning. The new owners take possession on Monday the 25th. You have until then to remove your belongings." Brody's chair scraped back hard from the table. "What are you talking about?" His voice had climbed the controlled tone, fracturing at the top. "You can't sell this house. I grew up here. Mom was here with us. You can't just..." The house has been in my name since August of 1987, I said. Your mother's name was never on the deed. I have the original purchase documents right here if you want to look at them. I opened the folder and laid the photocopies on the table between us. I am the sole owner of record. I don't need your permission, your awareness, or your blessing to sell. I spoke with a lawyer. Everything is legal, and it's done. Lacey got to her feet. The color had drained from her face completely. "Wait," she said, and her voice had shed all its careful polish down to something raw and truly scared. "Wait, where are we supposed to go? We just moved in. We're getting married. You cannot do this." "You have 10 days," I said. 10 days. Brody repeated it as though he were translating from another language in real time. 10 days to find a place to pack everything to? He stopped. Both hands came down flat on the table with a crack that rang off the kitchen walls. "I'm calling a lawyer. I'm going to contest this. This is my home, too." "It has never been your home," I said. I kept my voice even, not cold, not cruel, just precise the way you state a measurement or describe a material. This was my home. You lived in it. There's a difference. And I think if you go deep enough, you have always known that. "You're doing this because of the card," Brody said. His voice had dropped, now gone quieter, which was somehow more unsettling than the raised pitch. "Because I said something at dinner that landed wrong. You're punishing me for one bad night." I held my son's gaze for a long moment. "Brody, I said I know about the power of attorney. I know what you altered on the insurance policy and when you made those changes. I know about the messages on your phone." I paused. "And I know about the GoFundMe page with my photograph on it." The color left his face the way it had left it in the storage room, fast all at once. "Dad, I'm not here to go back and forth over any of it," I said. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to tell you what has already happened, because you deserve to hear it plainly. And because I am not a man who acts behind someone's back without eventually looking them in the eye and saying so directly." Lacey leveled a finger at me across the table, her hand trembling. "You are destroying our lives," she said. "Do you understand that we had plans? We had arrangements with my father, with the venue, with everything. And you are standing here telling us we have 10 days. Your arrangements with your father," I said carefully, "are a matter between the two of you. They have no bearing on this house." Something moved across her face when I said that, a flicker of something I couldn't quite read gone before I could name it. Brody was on his feet now, covering the length of the dining room, with his hands buried in his hair. I watched him the way you watch a storm, coming in, just taking it in, not trying to redirect it. "This isn't happening," he said to no one in particular. "This cannot be happening." "It is happening," I said. I got up from the table, tucked the folder under my arm, and held it against my chest. "I would ask you both to please treat the property with respect between now and the 25th. It passed to the new owners this morning in every way that counts." I turned toward the hall. "Who are you?" Brody's voice came from behind me, unsteady, rough at the edges. "You are not my father. My father would never do something like this." I stopped, turned around, looked at my son standing in the middle of the dining room, 34 years old, surrounded by the furniture, the walls, the table I had built, and I felt it all at once, the love, the grief, the 34 years of it, and the hard, clear knowledge of what had to happen next. "Your father," I said quietly, "spent 34 years saying yes when the answer should have been no. Your father is tired," I paused, "and your father is leaving." I walked down the hallway and up the stairs, past the room that had been mine, and past the room where Brody had slept as a boy, and into the storage room. I shut the door. I lowered myself onto the edge of the cot and pressed both palms flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. I breathed slowly and deliberately until my heart settled back down to where it belonged. Then I picked up my phone and called Hector. He picked up on the second ring. "Done," I said. "Good," Hector said. That was all either of us needed. The house had gone quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks. I noticed it when I came out of the storage room at 6:45, that particular stillness that settles over a space when the tension has either resolved itself or moved somewhere else. Brody and Lacey's door was shut. No television, no movement, no voices. I stood in the hallway and listened and heard nothing but the house itself settling downstairs. Their coffee mugs sat unwashed in the sink. They had left early and in a hurry. I washed the mugs anyway, not out of any obligation to them, but because I was the kind of man who washed mugs when he found them, and that wasn't going to change regardless of anything else that had. I brewed my own coffee, carried it out to the back porch, and settled into the old lawn chair looking at Norma's lemon tree in the early light. 6 days, I thought. 6 more days in this house. My phone rang at 7:22. Renee. I'd been expecting this call without quite knowing when it would arrive. Her voice was nothing like Brody's quieter, more measured the voice of a woman who had spent years on overnight shifts in emergency rooms and learned to hold herself steady when everything around her wasn't. "Dad," she said. "Good morning, Renee. Brody called me last night." A pause. "He was upset." "I imagine he was," I said. "Dad." A longer pause. "I've been awake since 2 in the morning, trying to figure out what to say to you, and I still don't have it, so I'm just going to say what's true." I heard her draw a breath that cost her something. "I was at that dinner. I heard what he said to you, and I just sat there. I didn't say a word. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Not sorry for him. Sorry for me." Her voice broke on that last word, only slightly the way a voice breaks when it's been carrying something too long and finally sets it down. "You don't need to carry that," I said gently. "I do, though," she said. "It was my place to say something. You're my father." She paused. "Are you okay? Honestly?" "Honestly," I said, "I am better than I've been in a long time." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Brody said you sold the house." I did. "He said you bought something, a condo in the Ozark Highlands." "Second floor," I said. "Balcony looking out over the city." The silence that followed was softer than the ones before it. "That sounds like something Mom would have loved," she said. My chest pulled tight around those words in a way I hadn't braced for. "Yeah," I said, "it does." "Can I visit?" The question came out younger than she was, the way questions do when someone isn't entirely sure they have the right to ask. Anytime I said, "You will always have a room there. That hasn't changed, and it's not going to change." She made a sound. I recognized it, the particular controlled exhale of a woman who had spent her career not crying in front of people and couldn't always switch that off once she was allowed to. We talked for another 20 minutes about smaller things. Her work. A patient who had made her laugh the week before. Eli's plans at the auto shop. The kind of conversation we hadn't had in years. No hurry to it, no agenda. The kind that reminds you that not everything in a family falls apart at the same time. After we hung up, I sat on the porch until the morning had fully warmed. At 9:30, Berta came through the back gate carrying a covered plate. "Empanadas," she said, as though it required no further explanation, because it didn't. She took the other chair, the one that had been Norma's, and we ate without ceremony the way two people do when they've known each other long enough that sharing a meal needs no occasion. After a while, she mentioned she'd heard shouting the previous night. I told her I had told them. She gave a single nod and pulled another piece off her empanada. "Good," she said. I thanked her for what she'd said in the living room the week before. She dismissed the thanks with a sound and said she'd only spoken what was plainly true and someone had to say it. We sat until the plate was empty. My phone buzzed. Brody. "We found a place. Moving out Sunday. Don't expect a goodbye." I read it once, set the phone face down, and looked at the lemon tree. What I felt wasn't hurt. It was something quieter than that. The particular sadness of watching someone reach for the smaller version of themselves when a larger one was right there waiting for them. "Everything okay?" Berta asked. "Yes," I said, and it was. Darius Colton arrived at 9:00 sharp in the same blue jacket he'd worn at the closing. Alicia beside him, with the baby against her chest, and an expression on her face that was working hard not to be too obviously the look of someone who still couldn't quite believe this was real. I met them at the front door. "Mr. Callard," Darius said. "It's yours now," I said, and stepped back to let them in. I had spent the previous 6 days in a state of deliberate calm, moving through the house with the focused efficiency of someone who has made peace with a decision and is now simply carrying it out. Brody and Lacey had moved out on Sunday as promised, without a goodbye. As promised, leaving behind 3 garbage bags of things they'd decided weren't worth the trouble, which I left for Darius and Alicia to deal with as they saw fit. I was loading my last bag into the truck when the second car pulled up, a black Mercedes with Leawood plates. Harlan Dunmore climbed out first in a sport coat, followed by a woman I recognized as Phyllis and a man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase who had the look of a lawyer doing what he'd been paid to do. Harlan studied the house with the appraising eye of a man who had been promised something and had come to collect on that promise. Then Darius Colton appeared in the doorway behind me, holding a set of keys. Harlan looked at Darius. Darius looked at Harlan. The lawyer with the briefcase checked his phone. "Can I help you?" Darius asked. Harlan turned to me slowly. "Mr. Callard," he said, "what exactly is going on here?" "I sold the house," I said, "to Mr. and Mrs. Colton. Closing was the 18th. Today is possession day." Harlan's jaw tightened. He looked at the house, at Darius standing in the doorway at me, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, recalculation. The expression of a man who has just understood that he was lied to about something that mattered. Brody led me to believe, Harlan said carefully, that this property was going to factor into the wedding plans. Brody was wrong about that, I said. Right at that moment, Lacey's silver Audi swung onto the block. The car decelerated, and through the glass I watched her take it all in her father's Mercedes at the curb Darius framed in the doorway, me standing on the front walk with a bag at my feet. She held. There stopped dead in the middle of the street for a full 3 seconds. Then Brody climbed out. He took in his father-in-law. He took in Darius Colton, gripping the keys to a house that no longer belonged to us. He took in me. Harlan Dunmore turned toward his daughter. "Lacey," he said, the tone of a man who had run a business by drawing hard lines about what he would and would not tolerate. "You and I need to talk." Berta was out on her front porch. Our eyes met, and she gave me the quiet nod I'd learned to read, the one that said she had taken in everything worth seeing. I lifted my bag and put it in the truck. I reached Darius Colton one last time through the driver's window, and we shook hands. "Mind that lemon tree," I said. "Yes, sir," he said. I pulled out and didn't once glance in the mirror. Hector was already at the storage unit on La Cienega when I arrived. His truck sat fully loaded, the last of the boxes we'd sorted and staged the Saturday before, and the cedar box positioned up front on the passenger seat, right where I'd told him to set it. He had his back against the driver's door, working a cup of coffee from a thermos. The moment he spotted me turning in, he stood up straight, filled the thermos cap, and extended it toward me without a syllable. I took it and stood there in the August heat of that parking lot and drank. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Harlan Dunmore came with a lawyer in tow," I said. Hector said nothing for a beat. Then Brody called him. "Brody called him," I said. Hector moved his head slowly from side to side, not dramatically, just the way a person does when something is exactly as expected and still manages to sting. Then he pulled his keys out and said, "Ready to go." We headed out of the city in convoy, Hector's truck up front, mine behind, cutting west and then swinging north through Overland Park and climbing into the hills. 6 weeks back, I'd driven this same road with Hector and taken it all in as something that might happen. Today I was taking it in as something that was mine. The radio was locked on an old country station. I hadn't heard that music in years, not properly not, since Norma and I used to take Sunday morning drives up the coast with the windows open. I left the dial alone. Midway up the hill road, my phone lit up on the dash and rang through the speakers. Brody. His name sat there for 2 full rings while I decided. Then I picked up. "Dad." All the composure had gone out of his voice. What was left sounded younger than he'd been in a long time, something unguarded and worn down to the quick. Harlan's calling off the engagement. Lacey went with her family. Vendors are reaching out about the deposits. A beat of silence. I have no idea what to do. I fixed my eyes on the road on the back of Hector's truck, rounding the next curve, the city unwinding further behind me in the glass. "Brody, I said what you're going through right now. I'm genuinely sorry for it. Is there any way you could?" He trailed off, tried again. "Is there anything at all?" "There isn't," I said. Not said with anger, said with precision. "Nothing I can do here. Not at this point." Silence stretched out. "All right, look after yourself," I told him. "That's the one thing I'm asking of you right now." I hung up. The country station played on. Out the windshield, the trees had grown dense on both shoulders, the city retreating around every bend, the air threading through the cracked window, with a coolness and clarity the flatlands don't offer. Hector's taillights flared as he eased into the final turn before the building. I pulled in right behind him, and we came to a stop beside each other. For a minute, we just sat there, engines quiet, windows open, the sound of wind moving through the trees overhead, and nothing underneath it. Hector stepped out first. He came around to my window, draped his forearm over the door frame, and studied my face. "So, how do you feel?" he asked. I looked up at the building, the 3rd-floor end unit, the balcony where I'd stood 6 weeks ago, gripping the railing, and felt something settle into place about whatever came next. "Like I've arrived somewhere," I said. Hector gave a single nod. "Then let's get inside." 3 months on life had found its shape. I was up at 5:30 every morning, coffee in hand on the balcony before the city below had stirred nothing but a field of lights fading toward the horizon, everyone still asleep out there. By 7 o'clock, I was dressed and heading downstairs twice a week, joining a volunteer crew that went around fixing up homes for elderly residents throughout the valley. Hands-on work, the only kind I'd ever really known, because the hands remember what they've been taught, and so does the man attached to them. Hector made the trip up every Saturday. We'd sit out on the balcony, pick apart baseball, eat whatever I'd put together, and that was plenty, more than plenty. Renee came in October and brought Eli along. A full weekend, Renee took the second bedroom. Eli planted himself on the couch of his own accord, claiming the nighttime view from the living room was too good to sleep through. Sunday morning, we were all three on the balcony eating breakfast, watching daylight ease up over the city. No one said a word about how much had changed in a year. They didn't need to. A letter from Brody arrived in November. An actual letter, handwritten, the envelope addressed in deliberate block print, the kind a person uses when they're taking care with every stroke. He'd started therapy. He'd landed a job, property management company, ground floor, real work. He had a studio in Midtown, a roommate, a start. He wanted nothing from me. He only wanted me to know where things stood. I went through that letter 3 times. Then I put it on the kitchen counter and let it sit there under my eyes for a good long while. Writing back could wait. I wasn't ready that week. I needed the feeling to settle before I trusted myself to know what it was. What it turned out to be once it settled was something fragile and provisional. Like a door, one that had been firmly shut, pushed open the width of a finger. Enough to catch a sliver of light, not enough to step through. Not yet. Maybe one day. Eli made the drive up alone in December, the week before Christmas, beat-up white truck, a container of tamales Renee had put together, and a 6-pack of root beer because he hadn't forgotten that I don't drink. We sat outside on the balcony and ate in the cold with our jackets on, the December dark settling early over the city spread below us. And then he asked the question I'd known was coming. "Grandpa," he said, "are you ever going to forgive him?" I wrapped both hands around my cup and let my eyes rest on the lights. I thought about the cedar box on the shelf in the second bedroom. I thought about a kid passing me sandpaper in the garage and wanting to understand everything. I thought about block-printed handwriting on a kitchen counter. I forgave him the day I walked out that door, I said. Coming back, though, that's a different matter. That's on him to earn, and I've got no particular hurry about it. Eli took that in with a nod. He got it. That's where the road ended, or maybe where it finally opened up. After everything, after the house, the phone, the GoFundMe page, the insurance policy changed. Without my knowledge, the engagement that collapsed on the front walk. What I felt most was not victory. It was something quieter, relief. The kind that comes when you've stopped pretending a wound isn't there and finally done something about it. I believe God doesn't waste the hard seasons. The losses, the betrayals, they teach you things that comfort never could. What this cost me was years of patience pushed too far. What it gave me was the understanding that a man can love his son completely and still refuse to be used by him. Those are not opposites. They can live in the same chest. Here is what I'd want someone to take from these grandpa revenge stories, from this particular father story, if they're carrying something similar. Do not confuse silence with peace. If something is wrong, staying quiet about it is not keeping the family together. It is letting the damage spread. Keep your name on what is yours. A signature, a deed, a policy. Those are not paperwork. They are your protection. If someone is testing how far they can push you, the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is show them the line. And finally, walking away is not giving up. Sometimes it is the only move that leaves your dignity intact. If any part of this story spoke to something you've lived, I'd be glad to hear from you in the comments. Share it with someone who might need it today. And if you haven't already, I hope you'll stay with Grandpa's Revenge. There is more worth telling. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself.